Experts agree that the Egyptian and Babylonian civilizations were cultures largely descended from the ancient Sumerians. Sumer is widely recognized to be the beginning of human civilization. It was located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and in biblical times, it was called Chaldea or Shinar, the land of the Shining One. In modern times, it is called Iraq. The Sumerian culture has long represented an incredible enigma to academia, who remain perplexed as to how such a highly advanced civilization could just suddenly appear out of nowhere without any indication of the long process of incremental steps which would have been necessary for such a civilization to come about. For all intents and purposes, it just appeared about 6,000 years ago and then vanished just as strangely. Around 2400 BC, Sumer is known to have been invaded by Semitic tribes from the north and west. 50 years later, they were captive to the Semitic warrior Sargon the Great, who founded the Akkadian Empire, which stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Apart from fragments which survived in the teachings of occult groups worldwide, almost nothing was known about the Sumerians until around 150 years ago, when archaeologists, spurred on by the writings of Pietro della Valle, began to dig into the enigmatic mounds that dotted the countryside of southern Iraq. Beginning with the discovery of Sargon II's palace, archaeologists eventually found buried cities, broken palaces, artifacts, and 500,000 baked clay tablets, which discussed every detail of Sumerian life. By the late 19th century, Sumerian was recognized as an original language and was being translated. The Sumerians are credited with accomplishing many puzzling things, including the chronicling of the 26,000-year precessional cycle, or Platonic year, even though their civilization only lasted 2,000 years. They are also credited with inventing the zodiac, and researchers have always considered it a very strange thing that the Sumerians would have recorded the beginning of their civilization as occurring in the middle of that very same zodiac. When translators began translating the ancient stone tablets, they were extremely perplexed and even disturbed by what the Sumerians had to say about the true origins of human civilization. Their claim was that everything was taught to them by their gods. Among these tablets was found a text titled the Enuma Elish, and it is considered to be the oldest known creation account. In fact, it is now accepted by most researchers that the much later biblical writings were in fact corrupted versions of the Enuma Elish and other ancient Sumerian writings. The Enuma Elish, as well as other tablets, tell a very strange story which matches in large part the story relayed by the Dogon tribe of West Africa. As we shall see, this same story is found in virtually all ancient cultures worldwide. The Sumerians never actually called the beings who taught them knowledge gods, but rather used the term Anunnaki, which literally translated means those who from the heavens to the earth came. Many modern-day researchers have contributed in recent years to a better understanding of the Anunnaki story and a coherent chain of events concerning them, and the origins of humanity can now be ascertained in a way never quite possible before. According to these oldest of historical accounts found in Sumeria, the Anunnaki descended to Earth originally around 450,000 years ago. They came from a planet which the Sumerians referred to as Nibiru, or the planet of the crossing. Nibiru was said by the Anunnaki to be about 3 times the size of the Earth, and the Sumerian writings depict it as being the 12th planetary body of our own solar system. One fact known about the Sumerians was that they were able to both accurately describe and diagram Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. None of these planets can be seen without the aid of a telescope. Uranus was not rediscovered until 1781, Neptune in 1846, and Pluto in 1930. These ancient texts go on to describe how more than 4 billion years ago, Nibiru careened into our system, narrowly missing a planet which the texts call Tiamat or Marduk in the later Babylonian tradition. The planet Tiamat cracked due to the extreme nature of the gravitational stresses. Nibiru's moon collided with Tiamat, utterly destroying it. Many fragments left behind from this collision remained close to their original orbit, eventually becoming the asteroid belt. Many of the other fragments were knocked much closer to the Sun and over time bonded and coalesced into the planet Earth. One of Nibiru's moons was left behind in the collision and became our moon. The Sumerians called Nibiru the planet of the crossing, and they believed that its location was between Mars and Jupiter. After the collision, Nibiru continued on its orbit. Nibiru has been symbolized by many ancient cultures, especially Egyptian, as a winged disk or globe. Billions of years passed, and then around 450,000 years ago, the Anunnaki journeyed to the Earth. Their initial landings were made in water, a fact recorded by numerous ancient cultures. The supreme leader of these beings was called Anu or An or El, and he was said to have remained on Nibiru while the Anunnaki began a systematic colonization of the Earth. Anu's 2 sons, Inky and Enlil, were put in charge of the colonization. Enlil was the mission commander, for lack of a better term, and Inky was both the executive and science officer. Due to the customs of the Anunnaki, there was long-standing antagonism between the brothers. Inky was the firstborn but relegated to the subordinate role under Enlil because Inky's mother was not the official wife of Anu. This fact removed him from the royal line of succession, a custom later duplicated by humans. Inky, however, was chosen to lead the first expedition to the Earth. On one particularly interesting and perfectly preserved tablet, the Sumerians recorded Inky's own words. "When I approached the Earth, there was much flooding. When I approached its green meadows, dams and dikes were built up at my command. I built my house in a pure place." Under Inky's leadership, the marshes of the northern shore of the Persian Gulf were drained. Dikes and irrigation systems were constructed, and canals connecting the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were built. The Anunnaki possessed phenomenal lifespans compared to humans, a fact which led to their eventual deification. Because of this longevity, they were able to spend thousands of years at their initial efforts at colonization. Eventually, reinforcements arrived under the leadership of Inky's firstborn son, Marduk. With this second arrival, the Anunnaki turned their attention to their primary objective, which was mining out the Earth's vast mineral deposits. The most precious of these being gold, which the Anunnaki needed desperately to repair the atmosphere of Nibiru. Strangely, many of today's scientists contend that if we were ever forced to repair our own ozone layer, tiny particulates of gold dispersed in the upper atmosphere would be an effective way. The question has to be that if the Anunnaki did not relate these events to human scribes, how would the primitive ancient Sumerians know or allude to such science? Inky's initial efforts at implementing a gold mining operation in the Persian Gulf, utilizing some sort of water treatment facility, proved too slow and inadequate for their civilization's needs. Anu and Enlil traveled to see Inky and motivate him to greater effort. Inky then set up mining operations in Africa and Central America. The Anglo-American Corporation found extensive evidence of these Anunnaki mining operations in the 1970s in Africa. The finds by their company scientists dated the site to at least 100,000 BC. Since then, similar finds have been unearthed in Central America as well. Another mystery in regards to these events comes in the form of place names, which are found in both Mesopotamia and Central America. The names used predate any known contact between continents. The 2nd century AD geographer Ptolemy recorded a series of Mesopotamian place names: Kol, Kolua, Zubana, Kolima, and Zalissa. The Central American place names, already in use long before any known contact between Europe and the Americas, are the following: Kolula, Kolyucan, Zuaban, Kolima, Salisco. The words are almost identical. Experts at a loss to explain the similarity of place names using conventionally accepted history. Once the Anunnaki had mined the raw ore from their various mining operations, they carried it back to Mesopotamia for smelting, purification, and processing into small ingots they called zag, which translated means purified and precious. This is the origin of the Egyptian chem, produced by an elite priesthood which was called in Egyptian the White Brotherhood. Chem was a substance that today's scientists called monatomic gold. Many esoteric legends speak of how this substance was ingestible and aided in psychic abilities. Monatomic gold has a two-dimensional atomic structure which increases the current capacity of the human nervous system by 10,000 times. This allows the user to process fantastic amounts of information and leads to an extreme amplification of natural psychic abilities. Consuming enough produces a luminous effect on physical appearance, and the ancients described those who used it as shining ones, or sons of God, who shone like the sun. This substance is also said to possess amazing healing abilities and even may grant phenomenal longevity. Over time, this substance became known as the Philosopher's Stone and became intermingled with the medieval concepts of transmutation and spiritual enlightenment. Mysterious adepts through history, such as Nicholas Flamel and the real Count of Saint Germain, appear to have had access to this mysterious substance. The tablets go on to say that to ease ever-increasing tensions between Enlil and Inky, Anu placed Enlil in charge of the Mesopotamian colony, which the tablets call E.Den, or Eden. Inky was then assigned primarily to Abzu, Sumerian, or Africa. Abzu translated means the land of the mines. Credo Mutwa, one of the few surviving shaman priests of the Zulu nation, has in recent years divulged the inner secret historical teachings of the Zulu holy men who speak of a time when the Anunnaki, whom the Zulu call the Shatari, were there and ruled ruthlessly. He has recounted to researchers how when white missionaries arrived on the shores of Africa and began to demonize the ancient historical teachings of the Zulu people, the shaman priest formed a sort of Freemasonic brotherhood to keep their knowledge alive for future generations. The teachings reiterate what the Dogon and ancient Mesopotamian cultures say about the reptilian-like aspect of these creatures that are so often described as amphibious in nature. Further contention arose from the Anunnaki miners themselves, who began to rebel against the extreme nature of this work in an unfamiliar environment. One Sumerian tablet states, "When the Anunnaki, like men, bore the work and suffered the toil of the divine ones was great, the work was heavy, and the distress was much." This kind of ancient historical revisionism has had and will continue to have a very profound impact on conventional science until such time that its authenticity becomes widely accepted. Many scientists today are coming to realize what occultists have known for a very long time, that something is terribly amiss with the accepted version of man's ancient past. One such example is Dr. Arthur David Horn, who in 1990 resigned as professor of biological anthropology at Colorado State University after concluding that the conventional explanation for man's origins that he taught were nonsense. After a lifetime of research and study, he came to the overwhelming conclusion that extraterrestrials were intricately involved in the origin and development of humans. He stated, "The Anunnaki had been mining gold on Earth for more than 100,000 years, when the rank-and-file Anunnaki who were doing the back-breaking work in the mines mutinied about 300,000 years ago. Enlil, their commander-in-chief, wanted to punish them severely, and he called an assembly of the great Anunnaki, which included his father Anu. Anu was more sympathetic to the plight of the Anunnaki miners. He saw that the work of the mutineers was very hard and that their distress was considerable. He wondered out loud if there wasn't another way to obtain the gold. At this point, Inky suggested that a primitive worker, or Adamu, be created to take over the difficult work. Inky pointed out that a primitive humanoid, what we call Homo erectus, or a closely related humanoid, was quite prevalent in Africa where he worked. According to the Sumerian accounts, Inky's request was granted, and through genetic manipulation of an early hominid in Africa, modern humanity was born. The much later Book of Genesis would record in 1:26, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." According to both Sumerian and Akkadian accounts, such as the Atrahasis epic dating from 1640 BC, Inky's wife was a genetic scientist, for lack of a better term. The Atrahasis document details in vitro fertilization techniques and talks about 7 surrogate mothers referred to as the creatresses of destiny. Inky's wife, in all the records available, was the one responsible for the early genetic manipulation of humanity, and her name was Nen Karsok. She went by the nickname Nenti. Her creation chamber at the Egal, or Great House, was called the House of Shemti, from the Sumerian Shemti, meaning breath, wind, or life. These ancient records explain how, alongside her work with humans, she also researched matters of cross-fertilization with animals, and was especially concerned with crops. Scientists have now confirmed that selective propagation and crossbreeding of cereal plants began in prehistoric times. Early in her experimentation, Nen Karsok was recorded to have born an experimental surrogate child from a cultured embryo of an African hominid female that was fertilized by her husband Inky. The male outcome of the experiment was called the Adama, which translated means man of earth, or earthling. In time, this man would serve as an appointed delegate to the gods. It is recorded that at the temple of Eridu, in Anunnaki city, in southern Mesopotamia, he was given charge to become the first shaman priest using the secrets his father had taught him. Ancient tablets relating the story of Adama were first discovered along with the Enuma Elish creation epic in the library ruins of King Ashurbanipal, then also in the Egyptian archives of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who reigned in about 1400 BC. They explain in detail how the Adama was a mighty man, or humanon, who was granted extraordinary powers and was anointed into kingship because of his Anunnaki genetics. The Adama, or Adapa tablet, relates that being of divine or Anunnaki heritage, the Adama was of the royal seed. This means that the great importance of Adam was not that he was the first man on earth, but that he was first genetically engineered to be granted the priest-king status of Eden. Kawa, the biblical Eve, was created in precisely the same manner by Nin-Karsag. After this initial success, Inky and Nin-Karsag set about creating a large number of Adamas, both male and female, for the purpose of mining as ordered by the Great Assembly. Humans, by design, at this time, were incapable of reproduction and lived extremely short lives compared to their full-blood creators. Only certain chosen Adamas were saved from the toil of the mines. Dr. Arthur David Horne goes on to state, "The Anunnaki treated their created slaves poorly. Much like we treat domesticated animals, we are simply exploiting like cattle. Slavery in human societies was common from the first known civilizations until quite recently. Perhaps it shouldn't surprise us to learn that the Anunnaki were vain, petty, cruel, incestuous, hateful, almost any negative one can think of. The evidence suggests that they worked their slaves very hard and had little compassion for the plight of humans. Yet the Anunnaki eventually decided to grant humankind their first civilization, the Sumerian civilization. The first human civilization, however, didn't come before many more attempts at manipulating the early human genetic code, which bypassed natural evolution by millions of years. Finally, there was even an attempt to exterminate in whole that which the Anunnaki had created. Since these early prototype workers could not procreate, the Anunnaki scientists had to constantly create new batches. Over time, Inky and Nin-Karsag altered the genetic stream to allow for human reproduction. It has been theorized by some researchers into these matters that this was done in secret without permission from Enlil or Anu. In fact, the Sumerian records relate how Enlil at one point travels to Africa and to Inky's lab, and sequesters all of Inky's human workers, which enraged him so that he set about at sabotage. When Enlil had exhausted that workforce and returned to Inky for more workers, then Inky traveled to the colony at Edad-Den, or Eden, and designed a genetic lab for Enlil. At this time, he and his scientists altered the genetic code, and the Adamas gained the knowledge and right of reproduction. Many of the Anunnaki, including Enlil, deplored the fact that humans could procreate, and the later writers of the Book of Genesis would record the Elohim, or Anunnaki, as saying, "The Adama has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." DNA manipulation then took place to both reduce the longevity of humans, as well as limiting the use of the full capacity of the human brain. The Adama population began to explode as humans became fruitful and multiplied. Many humans were taken as slave labor to other cities that were being constructed along the main two rivers in Mesopotamia. Some Adama were sent to the mines or to work at other tasks for their gods. At some point, after many genetic alterations to make humans appear more like their creators, a mating interaction occurred. This sexual union between Anunnaki males and human females is one of the oldest surviving tales in ancient mythologies worldwide. Even the much older Old Testament would record this event in Genesis 6:1-4. When men began to increase in number on the earth and the daughters were born to them, the sons of the gods saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. In time, these bloodlines derived from this sexual interaction between the gods and human women would be fully chronicled in one of the oldest Hebrew writings extant, the Book of Enoch. 9 separate copies of the Book of Enoch were found at Qumran, where Jesus and the Essenes conducted their cult. There were more copies of the Book of Enoch present at this site than any other document. This is an indication of how important the document was to the Essenes and to Jesus, whose own bloodline was derived from it. These human Anunnaki bloodlines would also give rise to the so-called Grail bloodlines. Later intrigue within these bloodlines would lead to the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. I will be discussing that mystery in videos to come. Over many centuries, this interbreeding, continued genetic manipulation, eventually led to our current state. The ancient records tell how the descendants of the early Adama lived extremely long lives due to their Anunnaki genes. This longevity sequence became diluted over time as humans ever increasingly interbred with one another. The harsh planetary environment also took its toll. The extreme longevity of the Anunnaki rulers, however, made them appear to our early ancestors as immortal, and led to their eventual deification in cosmologies worldwide. The longevity of the Anunnaki and their early human descendants was aided further through the consuming of Cham. The first Adama were produced around 300,000 years ago. After enough genetic manipulation had taken place, the Anunnaki males began to interbreed with human females about 100,000 years ago. Not long after, a new ice age began consuming the planet. The last of the Neanderthal disappeared, save a few isolated groups in remote Siberia, which apparently remain today. Cro-Magnon survived only in the Middle East. 50,000 years ago, humans fathered by Anunnaki were permitted to assume kingship in selected cities. These were the grand serpent kings of old. The House of Enlil disapproved greatly of Anunnaki mating with humans and teaching them the secrets of the gods. The Book of Enoch relates in detail how these fallen angels taught magic and all manner of forbidden knowledge to humanity. About 12,000 years ago, a catastrophe occurred on this planet. This was the global flood so recorded by every ancient culture on Earth. According to the Book of Enoch, there was a very large asteroid on its way to impact the Earth. He described this asteroid as being a burning mountain, which split into 7 parts and collided with the oceans of the Earth. The Anunnaki leadership was convinced by Enlil to let nature take its course and to allow this cataclysm to wipe out humanity. A few Anunnaki, however, sided with humans and were horrified by the decision. The Anunnaki were ordered to evacuate the planet until after the cataclysm had occurred. Inky and his rebel followers made plans to thwart the total extinction of their creation and offspring. Inky secretly tells one of his human offspring of the plans and how to survive the coming calamity. Later Hebrew writers would call this man Noah, and the Book of Enoch recounts the tale of his strange birth and how Lamech His human father believed he was one of the offspring of the Anunnaki, or Nephilim. He was said to be snow white at birth, and light was said to shine from his eyes. He also possessed the ability to speak at birth. In the original Sumerian account, his name is recorded as Ziusudra, and the later Akkadian tradition called him Utnapishtim. According to Sumerian text, it was Inky who instructs Ziusudra in building the ark, including how to hermetically seal it using bitumen. He then instructs him to take into it the seed of all living things, alluding to genetic material of some kind. There are so many ancient accounts of the global flood worldwide that it would be impossible to list them all here. I would refer the reader to Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods for a full accounting of these stories. White missionaries to North America were amazed that every Indian tribe they came across already possessed the Noah story, in their oral histories often recounting how their people survived in canoes tied to trees at the top of mountains. They mistakenly took this as solid evidence that the entirety of the Bible was true and bolstered their already misguided attempts at converting the native population. In all accounts, the event was horrifying, and when one reads these ancient records, the sheer sincerity of the words of our ancestors never fails to disturb. Though the flood was a planet-wide event, humans stationed on highest ground around the planet survived, as did Noah and his family, a surviving lineal descendant of Inky himself. After the waters had subsided, a rebel group of Anunnaki, who had interbred with human women, descended once again. The Book of Enoch records 200 in number who descended on Mount Armon. This is the origin of the fallen angel mythos, where Lucifer and his band of rebel angels are cast out of heaven. Inky's deceit was recognized, and he and his followers were exiled to live out the rest of their existence on what was tantamount to a desert island lost in a never-ending sea of darkness. The rest of the Anunnaki returned to Nibiru, or planets they had colonized. Inky and his followers, without the aid of any technology from their home planet, set about doing the only thing that they could. They constructed cities and monuments out of sheer stone. Imagine that you were a survivor on a desert island with no stores or factories or any way to obtain tools and technology. What would you build? What could you build? This was the scenario left to the rebel angels after their exile. The rebel Anunnaki and their human wives and hybrid offspring set about rebuilding human civilization. Equipped with extremely advanced mathematical knowledge and engineering skills, the exiled Anunnaki constructed monuments out of stone which would defy even our greatest efforts today. It was during this time that the so-called fallen angels began to teach the forbidden knowledge to their wives and offspring. They began to teach them how to use their very biology to interact with and affect their surroundings in unseen ways. They taught them about the laws which govern this dimension of reality and how those laws were based on light wave harmonics. They even constructed this knowledge into the very measurements of cyclopean structures around the globe, in an effort to ensure its survival after the last of the rebel Anunnaki had passed. They did this as a profound gift to humanity, whom they viewed as their creation and biological offspring. The rebel Anunnaki who were marooned here continued to father offspring, and these children became, over time, deified like their progenitors. They had children whose names we now equate with many Egyptian gods, such as Marduk, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. Interestingly, one of the Anunnaki who is said to have fathered the Aryan race was called Nasi, Nasi. and one must wonder if the German occultists responsible for the Nazi Party were aware of this fact. Many of the mythologies concerning these figures are, in fact, historical accounts of family intrigue within these divine bloodlines. This was the time when the divine right of kings to rule was instituted based on Anunnaki blood lineage. Sacred priesthoods were formed in order to protect the knowledge which was being taught to humans by the fallen ones. Ancient Egyptian papyruses recount how the priesthood of Thoth was formed to protect and hand down the secrets of magic. Egyptologists and occultists alike have long known that Isis was always used as a representation of Sirius, and that Osiris was always called a dark god, equating him with the invisible companion to Sirius, the star Sirius B. The greatest secret of all Egyptian magic has to do with Isis. This is called the Black Rite, and was considered to be the secret above all secrets to the Egyptian priesthood. At its heart lies the secret of immortality, and what can only be termed as a form of instantaneous reincarnation. In time, Sirius and its two companion stars became the underlying meaning of all the so-called triple goddesses of witchcraft, concealing not only the knowledge of where the fallen ones had originated, but the doctrine that they had left behind. Temple's research provides ample evidence that the Sphinx was originally not a lion, but a dog, and was representative of Sirius, the dog star. The Sphinx was an ancient depiction of Anubis, the dog-headed god of the underworld. Temple claims that anywhere the word Anu appears in ancient literature, it is indicating Sirius and the Anunnaki. This dog marker is found in mythologies worldwide and in the oldest Hebrew tradition. Cain was said to have been given a mark by God to differentiate him from the rest of humanity. This mark was a black dog assigned by God to protect Cain against any reprisals from other humans for the murder of Abel. The idea being that God wanted to eventually punish Cain himself. This dog followed Cain all of his days, even as he goes on to construct a city in the land of Nod, east of Eden. This is part of the mystery behind the etymology of the word canine. Even the Chinese creation epic tells how two half-dragon, half-human brothers founded the Chinese civilization, and one of them had a companion, recorded in ancient Chinese texts as a black dog. Anubis was equated by the Greeks with their god Hermes. In the ancient Greeks' magical treatise, The Virgin of the World, describes a personage called Hermes who represents a race of beings who taught mankind about magic and how to build cities and temples. The treatise states that after these teachings, and thus with charge unto his kinsmen of the gods to keep sure watch, he mounted to the stars. The treatise goes on to explain how the priesthood of Thoth was formed to succeed Hermes and to carry on his teachings. It goes on to name Imhotep as the grand successor to the priesthood of Thoth. Some researchers believe that Hermes was actually the biblical Cush, who was the grandson of Noah. This would mean that Cush was the son of Ham and was Nimrod's father. The name Hermes can be translated as son of Ham. The Masonic Cook manuscript, which dates from the 1430s, accords Nimrod the status of Grand Master of Masons. He allegedly delivered the original charges and constitution to the Craft brethren, whom he oversaw during the building of the Tower of Babel. Babylon is called Bab-Ilani in Sumerian. This translated means gate of the gods. Cain likewise was a descendant of Noah, and the so-called Mark of Cain has long been discussed in esoteric circles. We know that according to Sumerian accounts that after the flood receded, the rebel Anunnaki introduced agriculture to humanity. Nin-Karsag, who was the wife of Inky and exiled with him, is credited with the genetic crossbreeding and manipulation of plants which produced the cereal grains that early humans farmed. She later became the supreme archetype of the mother goddess. Accordingly, modern-day scientists equate the domestication of the dog with the onset of farming in early civilization. It is believed that without the help of domesticated dogs, early man would have been incapable of domesticating and protecting their livestock, herding being especially difficult. And so the modern domesticated dog was a gift of the gods, and was also a symbol of the Sirius, the dog star. In time, it became the mark of Cain, denoting not only the Anunnaki or fallen angel blood lineage, but also the origins of that lineage. Strangely, the ancient Sumerians recorded that their supreme ruler had a daughter named Bao, which represents the sound of a barking dog, as does the ancient Egyptian word for a dog. Ow, ow. Bao was worshipped as a goddess of the dog star Sirius. She was called Sister of the 50. Because of the star Sirius B has a 50-year orbital period. This sacred 50-year orbital period was encoded in a number of ancient mythological stories, including Jason and the 50 Argonauts. This also later became the reason the Olympics were timed to 50-month intervals. Hecate, the Greek goddess of witchcraft and the dark side of a representation of Isis, also possessed the 50-headed dog, Cerberus. After agriculture was introduced, the maroon Anunnaki set about building amazing stone cities, circles, and monuments. It is in these mysterious structures that we find hints and clues to their underlying science. In all cases, the very strange science of harmonics and light wave harmonics are implied. The very measurements of these awe-inspiring structures seem to express the law of harmonics, which later became known to occultists as sacred geometry. Thanks for being with me on this exploration of the lost history of the Anunnaki. And join me on the next video where I continue to explore the lost science of the Anunnaki hidden in megalithic structures worldwide, as well as revealing what these structures were meant to calculate. Join me on another episode of Paranormal Planet.